recording oral history interview with Bill Simons, 134th Armored Ordnance Battalion, 12th Armored Division, World War II. Interview taking place on the 16th of August, 2008, 12th Armored Division reunion, Abilene, Texas. Bill, thank you so much for agreeing to sit down with us again. Just for the record, due to a malfunction with the recording equipment, his previous interview was not usable. There was no audio. So, prevailing upon you to tell us your story again. Starting with, well, before you joined the Army, what did you do for a living?
I worked in a body shop. They were rebuilding bodies and straightening fenders and going out and picking up wrecks with a wrecker and going out in the oil fields and getting trucks out of the mire and muck. It was a lot of fun, but it was good education.
Oh, of course.
Because I used a lot of that knowledge after I got in the service.
Now, speaking of which, how did you get in the service? Did you join up or were you drafted?
I was drafted. I had run out of work in the body shop, and I went down to sign up for unemployment, which was a new thing for me. And I checked with the desk, and we have some openings in Mare Island, which is a Navy base, repair, and they need men up there, and especially in the boiler shop. So I made applications. They accepted me, and so I went up, and I had done a little welding that I had in high school, taken welding. I had auto shop, and all of those things came in handy because when the Shaw was hit, it came back to Mare Island, and the first thing we had to do was to pull that boiler where the bomb had gone down through the smokestack and exploded in the boiler itself, and it tore up one complete side and tore out all the tubing on that side and the paneling that enclosed it. So my first job there was to remake that whole side of the boiler. They helped me take care of the removing of the shell, and I took those and made patterns and had the men then take them to the sheet metal, and they chopped out those deals, plugged the holes, and then I started and put the panels all back together, packed them with insulation and put them together, put the nomenclature on them for the rows and the height and sideways, and got them all molded back together, and they fit. And the master was surprised because I had got them all back together in good order, and everything went together. So he was taking all this down and putting it in a little book against my record. And I got through there. I went down on the ways where they had it in dry dock, and they were restoring the front bulkhead that they'd put on over in Pearl Harbor. They had just blocked off that front part of the boat, and if the Navy heard me call that a boat, they'd sure been on my case, because those were all ships. But anyway, they blocked off and made a false bulkhead, and they came all the way under their own power on one boiler. And that was quite a feat for one of those destroyers.
Now this again was the USS Shaw.
SS Shaw, yes. So they were setting the boiler, and I had to get in the bilges when they pulled it out. First, I should have told that part of it first, but the first part was to remove it, go in the boiler and take those 1.5 inch and 2-inch bolts out from the anchors. Some of them were locked in tight with rust, but most of them were oiled up pretty good, and they came loose, but they were big wrenches and hard to maneuver. You had room to crawl in, then you had to lay on your back or on your side to operate the equipment, to the tools, to loosen up the bolts, and sometimes we had to get our feet with it, hold it with one foot, pound with the other to get it loose enough so that we could start turning it with our hands. And one set of bolts we had to unscrew all the way with wrenches, and that was an all-day job for those 4 bolts. And we got it out and we got it repaired, and they put new tubing in. But when they had taken it out, I had to work on the mud drums, and where they had shipped it out, cut the tubes off, then shipped out the pieces that were rolled in and made tight. They would get a little too deep with their bit and raise up a little burr, and I'd have to file it all off with a hand file. And there was only one place after the shipmaster had inspected it. He said, "Bill, you done a good job, but you left one here. I want you to check it out and clean it up a little more." And after that, I had no recall on any part of the work that I was doing, because I had good instruction when I started, and I followed the Boilermaker's advice on all the rest of it. Now we got out of that and put it all back together, and then we put the stack on, and I worked with a welder and the riveter, and I got a tin cup and a pair of pliers and a bucking iron, which I had hanging on the front of me with a rope around my neck. And I would take that tin cup and holler hot, and all of a sudden here come a flying hot rivet. And I'd catch it in the cup, grab it with the pliers, put the bucking iron on it, and tap when I got it deep and set, I'd tap the side with the pliers, and the riveter inside of the stack would put his rivet gun on it. We'd hold it there until it came, and he'd give me a tut-tut, and then I knew he was done. So I'd turn around and holler for another hot. And we'd go around all that top, get it all, and then we had another row when they put the scoop to spread the smoke on. It was a new cover they were putting on so that they couldn't get a bomb down in a smokestack anymore. And it had the rim around it and the strength of the scoop to deflect the bomb. It may hit the deck, but it wouldn't go down in the boiler. They had lost one of the boiler makers in the and firemen in the Shaw when it was, because he was just going down there to set the fire and start it up when those bombs started dropping on them.
Now, how did you go from working in a shipyard, which is arguably a critical skill, to being in the Army?
I got drafted, and I went into the headmaster and told him that I'd got my orders, and he offered me an out, that if I would go over to Pearl Harbor and work there, on a 12-hour shift, 7 days a week, every day of the week, every day of the month, every week of the year, everything, that I could get time and a half pay for every hour I worked and double time on retirement. Well, I was so mystified with that and taken that I almost accepted it. But then the reality of I was going to lose all of my schooling and experience of auto mechanics, that I wanted to go into Army Ordnance to make use of my schooling. So I told him thanks, but no thanks. And he offered me a 3-year apprenticeship so that I'd only have 2 years to go to make my journeyman. But it still wasn't sweet enough, I guess, to entice me. I wanted the excitement of the Army. And so I went ahead and accepted the induction. Went to Presidio, San Francisco, and then when I was inducted, I got a 2-week stay and moved home back to Bakersfield, left my wife with her family, and said goodbye to my family. And I already had 2 brothers in the Navy that had joined up and had come up to Vallejo to tell me goodbye and to wish me well. And so then I told my family goodbye, and my oldest brother was still working in the body shop. My youngest brother was just getting out of high school. And all of a sudden he took a wild hair and left home and went to Texas, where I had been shipped. But long story, I'm getting ahead of it. I was sent to Monterey, Presidio Monterey, and was inducted into the equipment and the Army way of doing things, and got my uniform and my barracks bag, and then I got orders to take I think there was 11 of us altogether, and we were ordered to go to Fort Knox, Kentucky. And we were introduced to a troop train, which is a noble way of calling a freight train with seats, because we stopped on every siding and we got bumped by every fast freight train that went along. We finally made it to Chicago, had almost an 8-hour layover in Chicago, and so we had the free time, and I let the men go everywhere they wanted to go, and told them on their sacred word of honor and duty that they would meet me back there an hour before we were to go on the train down to Fort Knox. And we got off, and we started for our barracks bags, and there was none. They were left in Chicago. So 3 days later, they caught up with us. But in the meantime, we had got in there about 11:30, and called the headquarters, and they got a man over there with the equipment to carry us down to our barracks. And we got in there and woke everybody up and made them happy. We finally got to bed about 3 o'clock, and we got up at Reveille at 6. So we got introduced real quick. And then at company front, I got out there, and the captain had sent word out that he wanted some volunteers to seal the inside of his CP. So I had carpenter experience because I worked with my father, who was a carpenter. I violated all Army, and I volunteered. And I chose another man that said he had some carpenter work, and he come and helped me. And we sheeted the inside of the captain's office. And then we done the orderly room. And they were quite happy with it. We got a 3-day pass the next week. And by that time, my wife had come. And I had weekend duty that I think we were out on problems. And after we had my induction to the way of Army life and the rules and regulations, I finally got into life engines and graduated from that. First in my class, which was quite a remarkable thing. There was 4 of us, that 1, 2, 3. All of us were chosen to go to the 12th Armored Division, B Company 134. 3 of us in the same maintenance section, and one in another one, and then Slim Sempner was sent to, he had knowledge of the guns and the turret, so he went to the recon recovery unit, and he made good use of his schooling overseas when there was a bullet from an 88 tank that had shot directly through a barrel of the 88, which I think you have a picture of here in the, in the house, in the museum. And he took that off and took the whole turret off and replaced one with a knocked out tank. And so we were able to make use of all disabled equipment because we had equipment that was all the same. The Germans were up against it because they were handmade, and every piece of equipment was handmade to fit a particular area. And they did not fit them in factory like we did. Have a line up and make a part, send it down the line, and it was joined together with the other parts. And you kept putting these pieces together until you had a complete unit at the end of the line. But they didn't. They had it one place. They started at the bottom and started putting that thing together piece by piece. And they would have to drill all the holes and put all the bolts in when they got there, because they had one piece of head that was had already had the holes in it. Well, they'd drill through that hole to go into the other one. So it was all fitted as you go. And so we were most fortunate to have all of our equipment made the same way at the same factory, and all the parts fit. Mm-hmm. Although some of the parts were made in different areas, everything was made in that area always fit where it went because of the excellent machine work that they were doing. And it made it easy out on the line to cannibalize parts and to make use of what we had to do with it out on the unit. Now, I was ahead of my story. We got out of Camp Barkley, went on maneuvers, and from maneuvers we went down to Camp Barkley in Abilene, Texas, deep in the heart of a beautiful state, which we enjoyed, and we became acquainted with the people here, and it just really made us feel at home when they did. They made us feel at home. And now we've been adopted and we're back home. But getting ahead of my story again, we trained out in the field and became acquainted with the desert, with winds and rain and hardship, and yet we had fun. It was altogether a family unit that was working together. We depended on each other, and every craft that we had, every unit, depended on every other craft, although we were each one individuals and we had our own duties to perform. We had some ASTP members come in there in Abilene, and we welcomed them and taught them what we could and showed them what they needed to do, and they were apt and came in together and made good helping hands. And we went to Camp Shanks, New York. After D-Day, we were there in Barclay and heard the news on the air, and we were totally smitten because we were completely connected with the war now. Before, it was getting ready, and now we were totally committed. It seemed to be a new era, a new awe in us. Now we're going to go, and we're going to be in combat. And so we took things a little more serious. It was like we were joyriding before, but now this was it. This was guts truth. So when we got on the train to Camp Shanks, New York, we had one night on the town, and we made use of it. We walked the streets of New York, and we were ahead of Buck Jones. We made it to New York and walked the streets. He had to walk the streets of Bakersfield. Anyway, the next day we were quarantined. We were stuck. We couldn't go. But two of the men, I'm not going to give their names because they'll have to tell you who they were. We slipped out through a hole in the fence without tickets, without authority, crawled on the train, went into New York, went down into the tube, went across into New Jersey, forbidden territory, went to his house, and his mother, God bless her heart, took her weekly rations of a pound of bacon, fried it all up for us at midnight, her whole dozen eggs, and we left one egg on a platter. And when I was overseas and had a nightmare, it was seeing that dream of one egg on a platter flying around in front of my face, when in reality I was eating powdered eggs full of ketchup and black pepper and white salt to make them palatable. But anyway, we got busy with it and we ate it, and it was sufficient because we got through the day with it. Then when we got to, I think it was Southampton, when we disembarked, it was on my birthday, October 1st. And when I sent an email home, under the stamp, I had put 01. My sister-in-law's birthday was a year later, 02. And that's when the folks knew where I had landed, at the date I'd landed in England, although we weren't able to tell them where we landed or what we were doing, but they had that date. And then when I got back into my unit, later on, I told them where I'd been by all quiet on the Western Front. But ahead of my story again, we were billeted at Tidsworth Barracks, just out of Salisbury. And I happened to have leave and got into London by freight train. It was actually a passenger car, but we were hooked up with freight. And we got in there and walked the streets of London. And all of a sudden we hear a and it was a buzz bomb coming in, courtesy of the Nazis in Belgium. And they had shipped us a buzz bomb, a V2, and rocket. And it come in and landed about 2 blocks away from us. They were hunting for the palace, which they missed. And there was also a Queen's buffet at a great big table that must have been 100 feet long, and it was probably 20 feet wide. And we could go all the way around that, and there was a space in the middle of it where they kept shoving food out and carrying the empties away. But it was a monstrous feed, and the Queen herself wasn't there. Her lady-in-waiting and one of the princesses came to welcome us, and then she left. But we were treated royally. I met up with a Canadian soldier, and to this day I don't know his name because he always went by Canuck, and found out that he had slipped his regiment and they had gone to France, and he was just living from pillar to post. And he borrowed my flashlight and went into the latrine. When he got in there was a Bobby. He must have been 6'8", weigh almost 300 pounds. Went in there and got him trying to climb out the window. Wrapped him up under his arm and carried him back out. Got him onto the road and another Bobby out, and they got him into a car and took him away. And that was the end of my flashlight. And I got a new one replaced, but they argued with me a while because I'd lost that flashlight. That was government property, and it was given to me and not supposed to be vacated like that. But anyway, we got shipped over on LSTs and LCIs from there into Le Havre, France. And at the wharf, we received all of our vehicles, and I was in charge of making sure that they all got to the proper place and were in running order. And then went on down near Saint-Saëns to my own company and found out that my tech sergeant in charge of my maintenance section had left, and the staff sergeant had left, and they'd gone on detached service. Didn't know at the time where, they just said they were gone. So I had charge of the maintenance section, and it was quite an experience for me because I worked with 2 or 3 men, not with 20. But we got through it, and everybody was cooperative and done their job. And I told the guys that were drivers and were not mechanics to do that manly art, digging a slit trench, our latrine. And the point of beauty about it was one of the elderly ladies, grandma, sweetheart. She come up and she looked at me and says, "Latrine," I finally realized what she said. "Yes, ma'am, help yourself." And they hadn't even put the curtain up around it yet. But she went over there and made do. And all the guys stood in awe, but they were gentlemen. They all turned their backs. What I would have had with the project I had was welding extensions for the bows. So we raised up the bows of our trucks and weapons carriers so that we could stand up in them. And we had to put a 2-foot extension on it. And of course the canvas maker, tent maker, he had to take canvas and make the addition to close up the gap. But we all got it put together, and the drivers all helped with it and got it all together, and we moved down into company formation and went on to our first billet, got up into the hill country by late December. And one evening, on the 23rd of December, I was sitting with a Jeep driver who was driving liaison to company headquarters. And him and I were sitting on a 3-holer. And they were back off of the main square of the town. And it was open in the back, but covered on top and on the sides. And it faced the open countryside, which was covered with snow, about 1 foot deep, and all of the trees there. And it made such a wonderful winter card, well, like Christmas card, facing the picture that they used. It could have done that real quiet, neat, perfect, calm. And Mac said to me, he said, "Bill, do you think we'll ever have peace again in our hearts, in our lives, in our world?" And I said, "No, Mac, we're never going to have peace. Somewhere in this world, we're always going to be at war, because somebody's going to be selfish and want what somebody else has got. And that's what we're fighting here, is selfish and lustful ambitions." And he says, "Yeah, I believe that." The next morning, on Christmas Eve day, he took off in his Jeep and hit a landmine, and the 3 of them were blown up that was in there. Him, the lieutenant who was wounded, blown out and hit a tree trunk, and the man that was riding with him got blown up and landed in a tree limb, and I think he was tore up inside something. And then in the company, there was a man working under a truck, and there was ice on the streets, cobblestone streets, and a light tank that was coming up to have some work done on it. And as it was slipping and sliding along Cobble Street, it was coming up the hill. And the streets would go from one side to the other in their coming up around the hill, so that they would not create a land wash, but they could keep it corralled on this cobblestone streets and let the runoff be controlled somewhat. But anyway, the streets were frozen, and this tank was slipping and sliding, and this pry bar that the men had been using had been laid down and it had gradually slipped around until the end of it was sticking out toward the street. And this tank had come up and hit the end of it with a spinning track and caused it to spin in a circle, and it knocked a jack out from under that truck, and it fell on one of the mechanics that was working on it. He was just crawling out, but it caught him on his neck and head, shoulder. And that same morning, this other fellow and I, he was a driver, and I loaded up a engine to go up into the Ardennes forest, probably about 30 miles, onto the front line. And we worked there all the rest of the day after we got there, getting ready to pull the engine. And the next morning we got up, had breakfast, and we're working to got the engine out, the new one set, and the old one in, and we found out that we had to take the 12-volt starter and generator off of this and replace the 6-volt that was on the motor. Anyway, this weapons carrier that we were replacing the motor on, that had burned a rod out, was a radio car directing the artillery fire. And that morning, I got ahead of my story again. Christmas Eve at dusk, we were called to the chow tent, and we went down there and we had Christmas turkey dinner. And it was a welcome sight and an excellent repast. And then the next morning at Chuck, mess sergeant called me over, and he says, "I understand you're working here all day." And I said, "Yes." And so he made me 2 sandwiches for us and had me at my canteen, and he filled it up with coffee. And we had a little heating stove, so we had plenty of heat to heat our coffee. We always carried emergency equipment like that with us on DP. To continue, we had got down, and I had this man working on the generator and finishing up with hooking up the radiator, which he'd put back in. And I'd got it in underneath, put the starter in, and was hooking up the clutch and spring and whatnot there. And Captain come up with his Jeep. "Simon," "Yes, sir." And I pulled out from under there, and he says, "How long are you going to be?" "About 30 minutes, sir." "Make it 20, and that's an order." And I said, "Yes, sir." "I'm leaving my Jeep," he said, "and I'm taking the weapons, the 2.5-ton truck, so we'll have a little more time than you do. But you be sure and be out of here in 20 minutes. "Yes, sir." So we took the Jeep, and his other instruction was, when we left, to go down and take the little side road that was there and go up about 300 feet off of the road and go through the fences, so that where the gates were, there was maybe danger of bombs being put in the area there to blow up whoever might be going through. If we made our road through the fences, where we had these wire cutters installed on the front of our Jeep and weapons carriers and trucks, so that we could go through fences and whatever when we needed to. As we came up to the first one, well, we kind of stopped and looked it over and then backed up a few feet. By the time we had backed up, there was a little reindeer that come in alongside the Jeep there, or the Jeep, and put her nose up against my knee. So I reached out and patted its head, rubbed its neck, and it went up and put its nose on the fence, top bar, top strand. As we went through the fences, the deer just stayed behind us, and just like duty, fell right on through. And we passed that last fence while the deer come up and put his nose on my knee again, and then took off and went up far up to the right, maybe 150, 300 yards, and finally turned there at the brow, and we had motored up through the mud and had got up to the opening straight ahead of us where we were going. And the deer had turned and was looking at me and was wagging his tail, which I call a flag, which is actually the nomenclature, and was waving its flag at me and stamping its front foot a little bit. So I raised my hand and waved at it, and then I said goodbye to it, and we started up on the Jeep, and it jumped and turned sideways and run around the forest up there, and went on out of sight. And I found out after we got into camp, and reported to the CP, that they had word that that area was inhabited by the German soldiers 15 minutes after the time I had marked down. And I got into camp and told the captain, and he gave me that information. So I was glad I was able to clear the area and have that leeway, as I was not really looking forward to meeting anybody that had different opinion about me moving. So we got back to camp, and I found out about these men being killed, and we were up there closer to harm's way than I thought they would be. The company area was in a back echelon, and I didn't think there'd be anybody that would be having problems. And we come home on Scav, and my buddies had been killed. And it made me quiet, made me remember the quality of life, made me remember that it's only for a moment, that we don't know from one breath to the next which one's going to be our last. And as we went through our duties, I didn't think about dying. I thought about living. That was all that would encourage me from one day to the next, was living and living. I found 8 or 9 times during the war when I could have, should have probably, been killed. We were following on our general duties. We were following CCB, our command unit, in repair, and we followed the last vehicle. And as any vehicles fell out with problems, well, then we'd stop and fix it and get them back on their way back into their company and take up their duties. But one night, we were sent out to repair a half-track that had a blown bogie. And it was on guard duty at a little bridge at the southeast corner of Taberbischofsheim, which was an airfield, and the town there by the same name. But the Germans had vacated it, and all of our company and everything had gone almost a mile. You could just barely see a couple of their vehicles. Looked like specks, but they were visible from that bridge. But anyway, I had been fascinated because the half-track was out there to, you might say, protect the bridge. And they had all left the half-track and gone over and made some coffee. And across the street that came alongside of it, on the east side of the airport, there was a railroad track and a boxcar sitting there. And on the other side of the boxcar, they had set up a little kitchen with their one burner stove and made coffee. And I had become enamored with that bridge, so I went out and walked on it. And I looked, and that ditch was about 20 feet wide, and the bridge was about 30 feet long, and it was about 12 feet wide, and it had a little railing across the side. It was sturdy, didn't even creak when I walked out on it. And I had just walked back off of the bridge, and I heard a droning something go, whoa, 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 whoa. And I couldn't figure out what it was. And I finally drew my attention up into the air, and I saw something coming at me. And I looked and looked, and finally I saw wings on it. And it was coming at me. It was round in the middle. But I couldn't see any propeller. Generally, you could see a propeller flashing around. But it come at me. And I got down there, and he had throttled down, and he finally pulled the throttle out of the motor coot, and I found out it was a jet engine. Well, I forgot all about hearing about German jets. But anyway, he come in, dropped the bomb, and it hit back by the half-track, and it slid on that sand in that ditch to up about 20 feet of the bridge and stopped. And it must have been a 200, maybe 300, 250 pound bomb. And I was in awe. I was dumbstruck, dumbfounded, idiotic. Stood there, open mouth agape, looking at it and said, wow, that didn't even blow up. And he went on down past the railroad, and he circled and gave it the power and went up around and to his left out there 2 or 3 miles and come around, made another pass, and I hadn't moved more than another 30 feet. Got over pretty close to where my truck was parked by the railroad car, and I looked, and here he come again. And he got down and patterned, and all of a sudden he's shaking this plane from one side to the other and throwing the power on and just trying to make it wobble and shake. And I saw that the bomb was hung up in the bomb bay, and he couldn't get it into place to drop out. And so as he flew on by, I thought, he's going to have a trouble when he lands. That's going to be a hot time in the old town tonight. But the AA anti-aircraft had been in place down 3/4 of a mile or so. And as he flew down past there, the first time he went by, they hadn't had him in sight. But this time, when they got by, they had laid their guns down as far as they could. And when he come in sight, they started laying a pattern for him. And one of those guns was right on, and it hit him, and it blew up in the air, probably hit gas tank. And when it landed, the bomb went off. Well, that one was fortunate. It exploded and blew up everything. I don't know how much damage it did to the railroad track. He was not too far from. But I never went down to find out anything more about it. But to find out that a dumb GI could stand there so transfixed on an airplane, dropping bombs without sense enough to run and try to get away from it. And then I found out that the lethal area was over 600 feet. I could never have made it if I had a jet on my feet. No, I didn't worry about it. Whatever will be, will be. And kind of a devil-may-care attitude, probably. But it didn't make any difference about whether I went now, whether I went later. I was in the hands of the Lord. And that was the attitude I had. I knew about the Lord. He was not as close to me as he was getting close to me now. I was understanding that what I'd read about, the closeness and the comfort there is knowing our Father God and our Lord Jesus Christ, and the stability there is in having a firm faith and a foundation in God. I didn't have a battlefield experience, but it was one of those awesome, quiet reality that comes to you when you know that you know that you know that everything is all right between you and God. And eternity is just one step away. So it makes no difference. Do what we got to do. Get it done the best way you can. Get them back on the road. And let's just keep on, keep it on. And from then on, I never worried about what was happening. When we got to Herlersheim, we went through that, pulled a carburetor off of a burnt-out burnt-out tank, and took it down to a tank that had disobeyed all of the orders and taken the strainer out of the gas tank filler pipe and poured in gas quickly rather than doing it safely. So they found out the worst way and the fault of what they were doing. And then I told them that out of the heart of this tank that had killed all the men by this Panzerfaust that had hit on the tank and burned it up, that we had taken the heart of that tank out and put it in this one. And they were duty-bound now to not only do their job, but to do the job of these other men in this other tank, that they had their heart. And I don't know to this day the company, the battalion, or the tank that I had restored to mobility. But I do know that they understood the message. And I know that they came through victorious if they made it past Herlersheim. Herlersheim was a bloodbath for our CCB and a lot of the other units in the Patton's Third Army. We went from Herlersheim south into Colmar on detached service again. And we were strafed twice, starting at midnight, midnight Charlie. And the first night it was novelty. The second night it was desperation, because we knew what those bullets could do, because we'd been through one bath. And we were left our sacks and dived down that stairwell and got down into safety. All the families along there in these 3-story units had moved out of the top floor into their basements for safety. And the GIs getting into a house with a roof over their head instead of laying out on the ground because it was cold. We thought, man, what a deal. We got in there and we heard old Charlie coming. And the first night we run for our lives. The second night we run to save our skin because we knew the damage that was going to happen. And we left everything on that floor. And our truck that was parked outside the house escaped because they were shooting at the house. And then the other side went down the other side of the road, which had no vehicles in it. So they missed the vehicles that we parked beside the house. And they missed us because we dove down the stairwell. Anyway, we had joined the 1st French Army down there. And we were working from daylight to dark with them. And after dark, these Arabian soldiers, they had these white, I say white, they resembled white in the dark, gowns and cloaks. On the inside, they had their pots that they cooked in. On the other side, they had their meat and vegetables that they were cooking, and a water canister. And they were begging for a torchlight, another flashlight. I had replaced mine. And this soldier was bound and determined he was going to talk me out of it. And he showed me a beautiful golden ring that still had the finger in it. I wasn't too interested in that. He showed me a wristwatch. Yes, it was empty. It didn't have a wrist in it. But I didn't like the watch either because it already had the blood on it. So I let that go. I didn't need those kind of souvenirs. But he was bound, determined I was going to get that. He was going to get my torch lamp. But I was abstinent and I would not let him have it. So we finally recovered from Colmar after we had freed it and put the Germans on the run. And on the run they were. Worms was the only bridge intact, and we had crossed when we got back up to a little town out of Speyer, where the engineers had come, and they had set up a pontoon bridge. So we crossed on that pontoon bridge, caught up with our company, and fell in with the company and worked through the company then because the CCB was going so fast it was hard to keep up with them. They were making 30 miles an hour, a record. I mean, 30 miles a day. 8 miles had been the record before. But we were chasing the Germans. We got up to Dachau. We came through and saw that name in it. Man, Dachau, where all of these DPs stories have been put out about them. And all of a sudden we found out 66th Infantry had freed them, set them free. After the war, one of the ladies that was in Dachau had been transported to Los Angeles by the International Foursquare Church, a unit that I belonged to. And they came to our little church in Bakersfield. This lady and another interpreter. She was Dutch. Her and her sister had been put into that camp. They had an old raggy dress, and they were made to march out in that snow without the benefit of that tattered dress. They were bare naked. And the German guards were standing outside the fence, poking fun at them, making all kinds of obscene gestures. But it thrilled my heart to learn after that they had come home and they were going through all of this. The worst part of it, her sister had died just 2 weeks earlier before they were released. But I found out that the infantry had collected all the guards and put them in that. Oh, Geneva Convention, we can't go in there. But it was time enough, good enough for their DPs, but they couldn't go in. But they were put in. They were put in. And they were fed out of the same bucket of slop that they had waiting for these people. They heated it up and fed them that. They finally caught up with the commandant and they brought him back. Oh, you can't send me through there. Officer. And they said, no, POW. And it put him in his place. I had liberated a few Germans along the line, and one detachment of them, a company of 7 soldiers and this one officer, had came out of the woods where I'd gone to relieve myself. And as I saw them coming, I took comfort behind the tree that was about at least 2 foot through. And I'm standing there hollering for my driver, Shep, Shep, Shep. He never came. So anyway, I'm bravely standing there with my little 30 caliber carbine. And as they came through, I motioned for them to lay their equipment on the ground. And the officer kept his gun in his holster on his belt. And so then I walked up and put my carbine in his belly right above his belt. And I told him to take the gun loose and I would relieve it. And he started to pull it out. 9, that was the only word I knew. 9, which meant no. And so he stopped and I told him to raise his hand and he lifted him up to his shoulder. So I relieved him of the gun and had him unbuckle his belt so I could get the holster, which I didn't do until after he'd got down to the car, or the truck, or rather. So I gathered up all the rifles and the burp gun they had. Well, one of the men on the truck wanted that burp gun. Oh, he says, that's the one I want. So I let them have their pick. And I kept one for the driver, who finally come back. I missed all the fun. Missed all the fun. Well, we got them in place. They wanted Essen and relief. And I says, no, geradeaus. I found some other words that I knew. Straight back. And they went back there to find comfort in their camp, whatever they were set up in, displaced person then. And so we continued on, got into our permanent establishment finally in Heidenheim, Germany. And then we went north with our battalion, at least our company, to the Zeiss factory. And that's where we stayed for the rest of the war. And then after the war, after the war, while we were on service there, we had softball games, and we could hike around and check out the country. And there was a castle up on the hillside up out of Heidenheim, and we all took a trip up there, a few of us at a time. And we didn't go through the castle, most of us, but some of the brave souls went through it. They told me it was damp inside, cold, and the only warm place was where the fireplace was. So I was glad I didn't get to go through it. There was enough to look at the outside of it, and kind of forbidding to me. I liked the open and the grassy fields, and C Company was building it there at Heidenheim, and they had gathered up a bunch of horses. I went down there one day and asked if I could ride, and so I took a road up through the forest. As I got through the forest, I saw a beautiful green grassy field, and I rode up through that, and it was just a beautiful ride. And as I came back down and turned the horse back in and walked back to our unit, it had started raining. And I had walked about halfway back to where I had to turn to the left, go down the main road, back up to my company. And I got there and I saw this big lone tree out there, and all of a sudden it'd start to lightning. And it was quite a ways south of me, up over the hill where the trees were. And I didn't think much about it, but I had heard how the sergeant in the First World War had taken shelter under one of those trees, and he'd been hit by lightning because he had his barrel of his rifle in his hand, and he had grounded it, but he hadn't put the barrel down, and it had been struck by lightning, a glancing blow. It knocked him down, but it didn't hurt him. Well, I'd heard about that, and I said, man, I better get out of here. I hadn't gone very far away from it, 200-300 feet, I guess, and all of a sudden I heard a sharp crack and turned around and looked, and that tree had been split in half, right down through the middle of that tree, all the way to the bottom. It hadn't fallen down yet, but it had been split. And I think it was a day or two before it had ever fallen down. But the Lord was with me, leading me, instructing me in ways of a still small voice or an idea. And, you know, it's hard to tell just when the end is going to come and the voice is not going to be there. But here I am, almost 89, down in the comforts of a beautiful building, our museum in Abilene. And I feel that same thrill in my soul, in my being, where the Lord is speaking to me and through me and telling the others around that God is real. All we need to do is to believe on Him. Thank you.